Looking back, it's hard to believe what we're about to witness wasn't inevitable. But in those critical years between 1775 and 1781, nothing was certain. The United States desperately needed an ally in France, yet the French ministers hesitated, unwilling to risk war with Great Britain without knowing where the other powers of Europe stood. To understand America's struggle for independence, you need to understand the chessboard of European politics that would determine its fate. France could count on Austria's forbearance, for Austria had chosen the Bourbon powers as its allies. But beyond that, the landscape grew complicated. In fragmented Italy, stripped of strength, though not of beauty, Americans hoped vainly for support from the ruler of Florence, whose humane legal code had earned worldwide praise. The King of Naples, a Spanish Bourbon, simply followed Spain's lead. Yet the Italian spirit has always revered patriotic struggles. Alfieri saw in America the prophet of Italian unity. Filangieri prepared his work claiming reason's rightful place in human government, earning applause from the continent's finest minds. Portugal irritated the United States by closing its ports to American ships, then faded from the war's narrative. The Turkish Empire affected American affairs both during the war and at its conclusion. The Western Maritime Kingdom's conflicts seemed to leave Turkey's border provinces vulnerable, and English statesmen longed for peace so their country could speak with authority on the Bosphorus and the Black Sea. Great Britain pursued Russia's alliance with ceaseless desperation, but Russia's empress rejected every overture, repeatedly advising Britain to concede American independence. She confidentially assured the Bourbon family she would not interfere in their quarrel and would actually be pleased to see them throw off England's yoke. Her heart belonged entirely to the Orient. She dreamed of establishing a Christian empire on the Bosphorus, wondering why Western Christians preferred maintaining Muslims at Constantinople over her ambitions. She venerated the English people but held contempt for their king, predicting his ministry's failure. While she didn't love the French nation, she esteemed Vergennes as wise and able. In Gustavus III of Sweden, nephew of Frederick of Prussia, France expected friendship. The 1771 revolution favoring royal prerogative had been aided by French subsidies and Vergennes' counsel when he served as French minister in Stockholm. The oldest Delaware colonizers were Swedish, and their descendants maintained natural affection for the mother country. The Swedes, as shipbuilders and owners, favored the broadest interpretation of neutral maritime rights. Their king, possessing dashing courage though lacking perseverance, occasionally became the boldest champion of maritime freedom. Denmark, the remaining northern kingdom, was itself a colonial power, possessing small West Indian islands and an East Indian foothold. Its king, as Duke of Holstein, held a voice in the German Diet at Ratisbon. Its people were noble. Denmark became the first European state forbidding the slave trade, and before the century's end, abolished serfdom's remains. But its half-witted king employed Count Bernstorff, a Hanoverian, who professed believing a people can never be justified renouncing obedience to lawful government as foreign minister. Bernstorff wouldn't permit the Danish government to favor or even appear to favor the Americans. Danish and Norwegian ports closed against American privateer prizes, yet commercial interests forced Denmark to observe and claim neutral rights.
Of Europe's two last-century republics, one established itself among the Rhine's head springs, the other at its mouth. Switzerland's united cantons, content within themselves, constituted a republic rivaling the oldest monarchies in age, proving through good order, industry, morals, and laws that extensive confederacies could coexist with modern civilization. The United States gratefully venerated their forerunner, but sought no assistance. The deepest, saddest interest hovers over the Netherlands Republic, for the war between England and the United States prepared its grave. Of all Germanic family branches, that nation which rescued its unstable silt and sand dwelling from the choked, shallowed sea brought down by the Rhine has endured most and wrought most favoring liberty of conscience, commerce, and state. Their republic was the Reformation's child. For 3 generations, mankind's best interests were abandoned to its keeping. To uphold spiritual life's highest objects, its merchants, landholders, and traders so abounded in heroes and martyrs that they exhausted brute force, tyranny, and death itself, extracting from war life and hope for coming ages. Their existence meant unceasing struggle with the ocean beating their dikes, with rivers cutting away soil, with neighbors coveting territory, with England their ungenerous trade rival. Proportionate to numbers, they led in agriculture and commerce, first establishing credit through punctuality and probity, first seeing clearly that great material interests are best fostered by liberty. Their land remained the storehouse of renovating political ideas for Europe and asylum for all persecuted for their thoughts. In freedom of conscience, they were the world's light. From a taciturn, phlegmatic, serious people inclined toward solitude and reflection rose the men who constructed international law's code in justice's spirit. In 1674, after England spent about a quarter century attempting through legislation and wars to ruin Netherlands' navigation, the 2 powers consolidated peace through a commerce treaty guaranteeing neutral rights in the most precise, clear language. Not only was the principle that free ships make free goods recognized, but ship timber and other naval stores were excluded from contraband lists, both positively and negatively. In 1688, England contracted to the Netherlands the highest debt one nation can owe another. Not knowing how to recover her own liberties, they were restored by United Provinces men. Locke brought back from exile there the theory of government formed by Continental Calvinists, making his chief political work the textbook for free institution friends for a century. During long wars securing the new English dynasty and the Spanish succession, in which the Republic held little interest, it remained Great Britain's faithful ally. Gibraltar was taken by Dutch ships and troops no less than English ones, yet its appropriation by the stronger state brought them no corresponding advantage. On the contrary, exhausted finances and disproportionate public debt crippled their self-defense power. For these unexampled, unrequited services, the Republic might expect finding in England a wall of protection. But during the 7 Years' War, disregarding treaty obligations, its ships were seized on grounds they'd broken arbitrary British contraband and blockade rules. In 1758, merchant losses on these pretenses were estimated at more than 12 million guilders. In 1762, 4 ships convoyed by a frigate were taken after engagement. Though the frigate was released, George Grenville, then Secretary of State, announced by letter to its envoy that the right of stopping Dutch ships with naval stores must be and would be sustained. But this wasn't worst. England exploited Netherlands' constitutional imperfections to divide their government, winning the stadtholder's party through influence and corruption. The Republic was dear to the United States in many ways. It had sheltered their immigrant pilgrims, dismissing them to the New World with religious toleration lessons. It planted the Hudson Valley, and in New York and New Jersey, its sons still cherished their parent nation's language, church rule, and customs. The Dutch saw in American struggle a repetition of their own history. Americans found in them evidence that a small but resolute state can triumph over the mightiest, wealthiest empire's utmost efforts.
The people dwelling between the Alps and northern seas, between France and the Slavs, founded no American colonies, But they saw in the New World's rising people many tracing lineage back to the same ancestry, claiming fellowship with the youthful nations struggling for mind freedom and free institutions. Their great philosopher, Immanuel Kant, the American Revolution's contemporary and the man who alone among Germans could stand with Leibniz beside Plato and Aristotle, reformed philosophy as Luther reformed the Church on the principle of individual mind's self-activity. His method was mind employment in its freedom, and his fidelity to human freedom has never been questioned and never can be. He accepted the world as it is, only with the obligation that it must be made better. His political philosophy enjoined constant struggle to lift society from its actual imperfect natural state into higher, better conditions by deciding every question favoring reform and progress, keeping open the way for eliminating all remaining evil. He condemned slavery and branded the bargaining away of troops by one state to another without common cause. The rights of man, he said, are dear to God, are the apple of God's eye on earth. He wished an hour each day set aside for all children to learn them and take them to heart. He was among the first, perhaps the very first, of the German nation upholding, even at friendship's risk, the United States cause. Lessing contemplated his race's education as carried forward by one continued revelation of truth, God's thoughts present in man, creating harmony and unity, leading toward higher culture. In his view, the noble class had become superfluous. The world's lights were they giving clearest utterance to divine ideas. He held it folly for republic men to wish for monarchy. A commonwealth chief governing free people by their free choice has a halo that never surrounded a king. Though employed by the Duke of Brunswick, he loathed from his inmost soul the engagement of troops in foreign war, either as volunteers or sold by their prince. How came Othello into Venice's service, he asks. Had the Moor no country? Why did he let out his arm and blood to a foreign state? And he published to the German nation this lesson: the Americans are building in the New World the Lodge of Humanity. At Weimar in 1779, Herder, first vindicating people's songs in human culture annals, published these words: "The boldest, most godlike thoughts of human mind, the most beautiful and greatest works have been perfected in republics, not only in antiquity, but in medieval and more modern times. The best history, the best philosophy of humanity and government is always republican. The republic exerts influence not by direct intervention, but mediately by its mere existence. The United States, with its mountain ranges, rivers, and lake chains in the temperate zone, seemed to him shaped by nature for new civilization." Of Germany's poets, veteran Klopstock beheld in American war humanity's inspiration and an approaching great day's dawn. He loved the terrible spirit emboldening peoples to grow conscious of their power. With proud joy he called to mind that among the young republic's citizens were many Germans gloriously fulfilling their duty in freedom's war. By America's rivers light beams forth to nations, and in part from Germans, he wrote, embalming Herkimer and his German companions' martyrdom. Less enthusiastic but not less consistent was Goethe. Of plebeian descent, by birth republican, born like Luther in Germany's heart, educated like Leibniz in Saxony's Central University, when 7 years old he and his father's house were Frederick's partisans, rejoicing in his victories as German nation victories. In early youth, he, like those around him, was interested in Corsica's struggles, joined the cry of "Long live Pauli," and gave hearty sympathy to the exiled patriot.
Popular liberty ideas led him, in his 22nd year or soon after, to select his first tragedy's theme from the Netherlands' history's kindred epic.
But the circle's interest grew far livelier when, in a remote world part, a whole people showed signs it would make itself free. He classed the 1773 Boston Tea Party among prodigious events, stamping themselves most deeply on his childhood mind. Like everybody around him, he wished Americans success, and Franklin and Washington's names shone and sparkled in his politics and war heaven. When reform came to France, he and Germany's youth promised themselves and fellow men a beautiful, even glorious future. The thought of emigrating to America passed placidly over his imagination, leaving no more mark than a flying cloud's shadow sweeping over a flower garden. Hessian soldiers' sale for foreign money called from him disdain words, but his reproof of young Germans volunteering to fight for the American cause, then drawing back from faint-heartedness, didn't go beyond a smile at the contrast between their zeal and deeds. He congratulated America that it wasn't forced to bear feudalism's traditions, and writing or conversing used only friendly words of the United States as a noble country. Throughout his life, coming in contact with world-changing events, he painted them to his mind in their order and connection. 20 years before 1848's movements, he foretold with passionless serenity that as certainly as Americans had thrown tea chests into the sea, so certainly would breach come in Germany between princes and people if monarchy should not reconcile itself with freedom. Just before the 1830 French Revolution, he published his opinion that the desire for self-government, which had succeeded so well in North American colonies, was sustaining the battle in Europe without weariness signs. Schiller was a Württemberg native, the Germany part most inclined to idealism. In medieval days, German liberty's stronghold, renowned for numerous free cities, wide land distribution among small freeholders, total absence of great landed proprietaries, comparative extinction of old nobility. Equally in reflection hours and inspiration hours, his sentiments became the German nation poet invigorated by Kant's ideas. The victory his countrymen won against the Vatican and against error for reason's freedom was, as he wrote, a victory for all nations and endless time. He was ever ready to clasp the millions of fellow men in his embrace, giving salutation to the whole world. Glowing with indignation at princes who met profligacy expenses by selling their subjects to war against mankind's rights, a few years later he brought their crime upon the stage. Under German kinglings, the nation's sense couldn't express itself freely, but German political interests centered in America. Translations of British pamphlets on the war, including Price Upon Liberty, were printed in Brunswick. Niebuhr related that political ideas most swaying Germany's mind in his youth grew from fellow feeling with the United States in their independence struggle. While the truest, best German intelligence representatives applauded Americans as republic founders, the best German princes approved their rising in arms against a sovereign attempting to strip them of rights. Duke Ernst of Saxony, cultivated by Holland, England, and France travel, ruled his Saxe-Gotha and Altenburg principality with wisdom and justice. By court frugality and simplicity, he restored the duchy's disordered finances, providing for great public works and science. Though England's king was his near relation, he put aside enormous subsidy offers for troops to be employed in America.
When 10 years later he was ready to risk his life and independence defending Germany's unity and liberties, these are the words cheering his dearest friend to aid in curbing Austria's ambition. All hope for our freedom and Constitution preservation is not lost. Right and equity are on our side, and wise providence, according to my idea of it, cannot approve, cannot support perjury and all citizens' and states' rights suppression. Of this principle, the American example is eloquent proof. England met with her deserts. It was necessary that her pride should be bowed, that oppressed innocence should carry off victory. Time cannot outlaw mankind's rights. The friend to whom these words were addressed was brave, warm-hearted Charles Augustus of Saxe-Weimar, who in 1776, being only 19 years old, refused a request for leave to open recruiting offices at Ilmenau and Jena for English service, though he consented to vagabonds and convicts' delivery. When in November 1777's last days, the Prince of Schaumburg-Lippe, as British ministry's go-between, made unlimited offers for some of his battalions, the Patriot Prince called his ministers to conference and, supported by those present's unanimous advice, on December 3rd answered, "There are in general many weighty reasons why I cannot yield consent to deliver troops into foreign service and pay." It's minuted on the draft that Serenissima himself took charge of posting the letter. Goethe's signature, Weimar's youngest minister, is wanting from the draft, for he was absent on a winter Harz Mountains trip, but that his heart was with his colleagues appears from his writing simultaneously from Goslar. "How am I again brought to love that class of men called the lower class, but which assuredly for God is the highest? In them moderation, contentment, straightforwardness, patience, endurance, all virtues meet together." Did the future bring honor to princes' houses refusing to fight against America, or to those who sold their subjects to destroy the New World's freedom? Every dynasty furnishing troops to England has ceased to reign except one, which now has for sole representative an aged, childless man. On the other hand, the three Saxon families remain. In their states, local self-government has continually increased, and inhabitants' wisdom and will have been consulted and respected. In Saxe-Weimar, the collision between monarchy and popular freedom predicted for Germany by Goethe was avoided by its administration's wisdom. Nor is this prince's different fate to be attributed to accident. The same duty infidelity inducing some of them to support their vices by traffic in their subjects colored their career and brought them in conflict with eternal providence laws. The prince who, next to Joseph of Austria, governed at that time the largest number of men having German for their mother tongue, was Frederick of Prussia, then Germany's only king. He was a prince trained alike in war and administration arts, in philosophy and letters. It should be incredible, yet it's true, that at the Catholic powers' alliance moment against Protestantism, England, under George II and a frivolous minister, was attempting by large subsidies to set Russia's force against Germany's most considerable Protestant power. In the attempt, England shot so wildly from its sphere that Newcastle was forced to bend to William Pitt. And then England and Prussia and the embryonic United States, Pitt, Frederick, and Washington, worked together for human freedom. The 7 Years' War extended the English colonies to the Mississippi and gave Canada to England. "We conquered America in Germany," said the elder Pitt, ascribing to Frederick a share in the Germanic race's extension in the other hemisphere. And Frederick, in his histories, treats the English movement in America and his own struggles in Europe all as one, so long as Pitt was at the helm.
To what end would events have been shaped if Pitt's ministry had continued and the bonds between England and Prussia had been riveted by a common peace? But here, as everywhere, it's useless to ask what would have happened if eternal providence had for the moment suspended its rule. The Americans were at variance with the same class of British ministers which had wronged Frederick in 1762. With which branch of the Teutonic family would be the sympathy of Germany? Where stood its one incomparable king? He was old and broken. His friends had fallen near him in battle. The thought of his campaigns gave him no pleasure, their marvelously triumphant result no pride. He looked back to them with awe and even with horror, like one who has sailed through a relentless whirlwind in mid-ocean and been but just saved from foundering. No one of Europe's powers was heartily his ally. Russia will soon leave him for Austria. His great deeds become to him so many anxieties. His system meets with persistent and deadly enmity. He seeks rest, and strong, unavoidable antagonisms allow his wasted strength no repose. He is childless and alone. His nephew, who will be his successor, neglects him and follows other counsels. His own brother hopes and prays to heaven that the king's days may not be prolonged. Worn by unparalleled labor and years, he strikes against obstacles on all sides as he seeks to give a sure life to his kingdom. Prudence teaches him that he must still dare and suffer and go on. He must maintain Protestantism and German liberty against Austria, which uses the imperial crown only for its advantage as a foreign power and relentlessly aims at his realm's destruction. The most perfect government he held to be that of a well-administered monarchy. But then, he added, kingdoms are subjected to the caprice of a single man whose successors will have no common character. A good-for-nothing prince succeeds an ambitious one, then follows a devotee, then a warrior, then a scholar, then, it may be, a voluptuary, and the genius of the nation, diverted by the variety of objects, assumes no fixed character. But republics fulfill more promptly the design of their institution and hold out better, for good kings die, but wise laws are immortal. There is unity in the end which republics propose and in the means which they employ, and they therefore almost never miss their aim. The republic which arose in America encountered no unfavorable prejudice in his mind. With the France which protected the United States, he had a common feeling. Liberal English statesmen commanded his goodwill, but he detested the policy of Bute and of North, so that for him and for America there were in England the same friends and the same enemies. In November 1774, he expressed the opinion that the British colonies would rather be buried under the ruins of their settlements than submit to the yoke of the mother country. He was astonished at the apathy and gloomy silence of the British nation on undertaking a war alike absurd and fraught with hazard. The treatment of the colonies, he wrote in September 1775, appears to me to be the first step toward despotism. In October of the same year, the British minister at Berlin reported, "His ill state of health threatens him with a speedy dissolution." What thoughts filled his mind while others believed him dying, we know from himself. "During my illness, in which I have passed many moments doing nothing, these are the ideas that occupied my mind. It seems to me very hard to proclaim as rebels free subjects who only defend their privileges against the despotism of a ministry." This he said at George III's proclamation, which had denounced the American insurgents as traitors. The more I reflect on the British government's measures, the more they appear to me arbitrary and despotic. The British Constitution itself seems to authorize resistance. That the court has provoked its colonies to withstand its measures, nobody can doubt. It invents new taxes. It wishes by its own authority to impose them on its colonies in manifest breach of their privileges. The colonies do not refuse their former taxes and demand only with regard to new ones to be placed on the same footing with England, but the government will not accord to them the right to tax themselves. This is the whole history of these disturbances. If I had a voice in the British cabinet, I should take advantage of the colonies' good disposition to reconcile myself with them. In order to interest the nation in this war, the British court will offer conditions of reconciliation, but it will make them so burdensome that the colonies will never be able to accept them. The issue of this contest cannot fail to make an epoch in British annals. The great question is always whether the colonies will not find means to separate entirely from the mother country and form a free republic. The examples of the Netherlands and of Switzerland make me at least presume that this is not impossible. Nearly all of Europe takes the part of the colonies and defends their cause, while that of the court finds neither favor nor aid.
No prince could be farther than Frederick from romantic attempts to rescue from oppression foreign colonies that were beyond his reach.
In a careful search through his cabinet papers for several years, historians have found no letter or part of a letter in which he allowed his kingdom's interest to suffer from personal pique or dynastic influences. His cares are for the country which he rather serves than rules. He sees and exactly measures its weakness as well as its strength, and gathers every one of its disconnected parts under his wings. When, in May 1776, a plan for direct commerce with America was suggested, Frederick answered, "The plan appears to me very problematic. Without a fleet, how could I cause such commerce to be respected?" In September, he received from his minister in London a French version of the American Declaration of Independence and of American Confederation Articles, with the formal expression of the United States' earnest desire to obtain his friendship and establish a mutually beneficial free commerce between their distant countries. The great king received from Franklin with unmingled satisfaction the Republic's manifesto and its first Constitution essay. Washington's victories at Trenton and Princeton proved to him that the colonies had become a nation. He supported neutrals' rights in their fullest extent, but as to direct commerce, he could only answer as before, "I am without a navy. Having no armed ships to protect trade, the direct commerce could only be conducted under the Netherlands flag, and England respects that flag no longer. St. Eustatius is watched by at least 90 English cruisers. Under more favorable circumstances, our Cilician linens, our woolens, and other manufactures might find a new market." But while he postponed negotiations, he, who was accustomed to utter his commands tersely and not to repeat his words, charged his minister thrice over in the same rescript to say and do nothing that could offend or wound the American people. In the war's remaining years, some one of the American agents would ever and anon renew the same proposition, but he always in gentle words turned aside the request, which interfered with his nearer duty to Prussia. Against Franklin's advice and a seasonable hint from the Prussian minister, Schulenburg, that the visit would be premature, Arthur Lee went by way of Vienna to Berlin. At Vienna, he was kept aloof by Kaunitz, socially and from the Foreign Office. In Berlin, he, as a traveler, was assured of protection. Frederick, though he refused to see him, promised his influence to prevent new treaties by England for German troops, and to troops destined to America forbade the transit through any part of his dominions. Eliot, then British minister in Berlin, for 1,000 guineas, induced a burglar to steal Arthur Lee's papers. But on Arthur Lee's complaint to the police, he sent them back after reading them and spirited the thief out of the kingdom. Against the court's rules, he hurried to Potsdam. The king refused to see him, and a cabinet order in his own handwriting still preserves his judgment on Eliot. It is a case of public stealing, and he should be forbidden the court. But I will not push matters with rigor. And to his minister in London he wrote, "Oh, the worthy pupil of Bute! In truth, the English ought to blush for shame at sending such ministers to foreign courts."
England's people cherished the Prussian king's fame as in some measure their own, and unanimously desired the renewal of his alliance. The ministry sought to open the way for it through his envoy in London. Frederick replied, "No man is further removed than myself from having connections with England." "A scalded cat fears cold water," says the proverb. "If that crown would give me all the millions possible, I would not furnish it 2 small files of my troops to serve against the colonies." "Never in past ages," he continued some weeks later, "has England's situation been so critical. Her ministry is without men of talent. A glance at the situation shows that if she continues to employ the same generals, 4 campaigns will hardly be enough to subjugate her colonies. All good judges agree with me that if the colonies remain united, the mother country will never subjugate them.
My marine is nothing but a mercantile marine, of which I know the limits too well to go beyond them. If the colonies shall sustain their independence, a direct commerce with them will follow, of course. Having taken his position toward England, he proceeded to gain the aid of France as well as of Russia against Bavaria's annexation to the Austrian dominions. And in the aged Maurepas' breast, whose experience in office preceded the 7 Years' War, there remained enough of the earlier French traditions to render him jealous of such an aggrandizement of his country's old rival. The question's vital importance was understood at Potsdam and at Vienna. Kaunitz, who made it Austrian policy's cardinal point to overthrow the Kingdom of Prussia, looked upon Bavaria's acquisition as the harbinger of success. When Joseph repaired to Paris to win France for his design through his sister, Marie Antoinette, the Prussian envoy was commanded to be watchful but to be silent. No sooner had the emperor retired than Frederick, knowing that Maurepas had resisted the queen's influence, renewed his efforts, and through a confidential French agent sent to him under the pretext of attending the midsummer military reviews at Magdeburg, the two kingdoms adjusted their foreign policy, of which the central points lay in the United States and in Germany. France, if she would venture on war with England, needed security and encouragement from Frederick on Germany's side, and his aid to stop German troops' sale. He met the overture with joy, and near July's end wrote with his own hand, "No, certainly we have no jealousy of France's aggrandizement. We even put up prayers for her prosperity, provided her armies are not found near Wesel or Halberstadt." You can assure de Maurepas, so he continued in August and September, that I have no connection whatever with England, nor do I grudge to France any advantages she may gain by the war with the colonies. Her first interest requires Great Britain's enfeeblement, and the way to this is to make it lose its colonies in America. The present opportunity is more favorable than ever before existed, and more favorable than is likely to recur in 3 centuries. The colony's independence will be worth to France all which the war will cost. To preserve his own kingdom and Germany's liberties, he pressed upon the French Council an alliance of France, Prussia, and Russia. Italy and Bavaria would follow, he said, and no alliance would be left to Austria except that with England. If it does not take place, troubles are at hand to be decided only by the sword. In his infirm old age, he felt his own powers utterly unequal to the renewal of such a conflict, and he saw no hope for himself, as King of Prussia, to rescue Bavaria, and with it Germany, from absorption by Austria, except in France and Russia's goodwill. While Frederick was encouraging France to strike a decisive blow in favor of the United States, their cause found an efficient advocate in Marie Antoinette. She placed in her husband's hands a memoir which had been prepared by Count de Melbois and Count d'Estaing, and which censured his minister's timid policy. Europe's states, it was said, would judge Louis XVI's reign by the manner in which that prince will know how to avail himself of the occasion to lower the pride and presumption of his rival.
The French Council nevertheless put off the day of decision. Even so late as November 23, 1777, every one of them, except the Minister of the Marine and Vergennes, Maurepas above all, desired to avoid a conflict. Frederick all the more continued his admonitions through his minister at Paris that France had now an opportunity which must be regarded as unique, that England could from no quarter obtain the troops which she needed, that Denmark would be solicited in vain to furnish ships of war and mariners, that he himself, by refusing passage through any part of his dominions to the recruits levied in Germany, had given public evidence of his sympathy with the Americans, that France, if she should go to war with England, might be free from apprehension alike on Russia's side and Prussia's. So when Burgoyne's army surrender news was received at Paris, and every face, even that of the French king, showed signs of joy, Maurepas prepared to yield.
But first he wished the great warrior, who knew so well the relative forces of the House of Bourbon and England, to express his judgment on a war's probable issues. Frederick, renewing assurances of his own goodwill and Russia's non-interference, replied, "The chances are 100 to 1 that the colonies will sustain their independence." Balancing Burgoyne's disasters with Howe's successes, he wrote, "These triumphs of Howe are ephemeral. The ministry may get funds, but where will they get 20,000 men? I see no gate at which they can knock for auxiliaries." England made originally an awkward mistake in going to war with its colonies. Then followed the illusion of being able to subjugate them by a corps of 7,000 men. Next, the scattering of its different corps, which has caused the failure of all its enterprises. I am of Chatham's opinion that its ill success is due to the ignorance, rashness, and incapacity of its ministry. Even should there be a change in the ministry, the Tories would still retain the ascendancy. The primal source of Britain's decay is to be sought in the departure of its present government in a sovereign degree from the principles of British history. All the efforts of His Britannic Majesty tend to despotism. It is only to the principles of the Tories that the present war with the colonies is to be attributed. The reinforcements which these same ministers design to send to America will not change the face of affairs, and independence will always be the indispensable condition of an accommodation. At the same time, Frederick expressed more freely his sympathy with the United States. Emden's port could not receive their cruisers for want of a fleet or fort to defend them from insult, but he bade them welcome at Danzig. He forbade the subsidiary troops, both from Ansbach and Hesse, to pass through his dominions. The prohibition resounded throughout Europe, and he announced to the Americans that it was given to testify his goodwill for them. Every facility was afforded them to ship arms from Prussia. Before 1777's end, he promised not to be the last to recognize the United States' independence. And in January 1778, his minister Schulenburg wrote officially to one of their commissioners in Paris, "The king desires that your generous efforts may be crowned with complete success. He will not hesitate to recognize your independence when France, which is more directly interested in the event of this contest, shall have given the example." And that example was coming. The threads of European politics, woven through the courts of Versailles, Potsdam, Vienna, and Madrid, were drawing tight around Great Britain. The American colonists, fighting alone in their wilderness, were about to discover they were not alone at all. The greatest powers of Europe were watching, calculating, preparing to strike. Frederick of Prussia, that aged warrior philosopher king, had already made his choice. He would not lift a finger to help Britain crush the Republic rising in the West. More than that, he would do everything in his power, short of war, to ensure its success. The world was changing. The old order, built on hereditary right and unquestioned authority, was meeting its match in something new, something dangerous, something irresistible. In America, men were proving that they could govern themselves, that they didn't need kings, that wise laws were immortal while good kings die. And in the palaces of Europe, even among princes and emperors, there were those who understood what this meant, who recognized in America's struggle the shape of the future. Britain stood almost alone, her king obstinate, her ministry incompetent, her generals confused, her treasury strained. Against her were arrayed not just Washington's ragged army, but the sympathy of enlightened minds across the civilized world, the self-interest of rival powers, and the inexorable logic of history itself. The question was no longer whether America could win its independence. The question was whether Britain could avoid catastrophic defeat. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the European dimensions of America's revolutionary struggle, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from history. The connections between the American Revolution and European politics shaped our modern world in ways most people never learn about, and there's so much more to explore.